why must I wear God's disguise? One day I'll learn who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how the chorus starts.
Yeah.
And to think that that's the view. Like, I have to put this mask on.
Yeah.
And now
in order to fit in,
I
have to lie about who I am.
Yeah. And that's God's disguise now. It's not just the pastors, because the culture, the leadership, and then the culture of the church has spoken for God in this way. They have represented God this way.
Yeah.
So I have to wear this mask in order to be seen as not flawed, in order to be seen as acceptable.
Or just acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just to be seen. Hey everyone, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. It's good to have you with us. Scott and Mike here, ready to solve the problems of the world and take care of everybody.
That's
what we do, right?
Really? That's what we do?
That's not your goal? I assumed.
Wow.
I thought we were on the same page with this one.
We are not. We don't even pretend to be on the same page.
Well, that is often true. Yeah. So
I like people, Mike. So.
Well, good for you. Jeez.
Wow. There's a bus. Oh wait, you're already under it.
Oh, I'm already under there. Yeah. We are 1 minute in, and I'm already under the bus. Thanks.
That's a good thing, though. Right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, we're getting better.
One of us is, yeah.
All right. Well, if you listened last week, we talked about the issue of authority, particularly pastoral authority, but authority with spiritual leadership in faith communities, ministry communities, churches, whatever that looks like. Whatever you might be familiar with, but there's usually some leader or some group of leaders, and often they take charge. They declare authority or are given authority, and so the conversation we had last week centered around what is authority. Is it actually a biblical concept? Is it even a real thing? And one of the I wouldn't say conclusions, because we tend not to come to a lot of conclusions here, but one area that we moved into towards the end was the recognition that that Scripture has authority, but people were never meant to have authority over other people. There was not this power over. Yeah, better to say it. But that was not part of a scriptural mandate. The only authority that we see in the New Testament given to any leaders was not a power over, but a mandate to live in a way that can be imitated. Live in a way that imitates Christ.
And then they were called to be that example.
Yeah.
And
right.
Yeah.
And to care for the hearts and souls of people. But caring didn't mean using a whip.
Yeah, it wasn't for their own gain. Yeah. Like, that's really like, when somebody manipulates or leverages their role within the community for their own benefit, they've ceased to do what Christ has called us to do as leaders. Yeah. And I think that's really important to grasp. Which is an interesting one, because we had talked a little bit last week about off camera about, hey, maybe what could we do, coming up? And you'd said maybe it'd be fun sometime to pick a song with some lyrics.
I'm not sure if I said fun.
You said it'd be interesting to do like a reflection on some song lyric, and then you were like, after we did the recording a couple days later, you sent me this message and said, this may be too soon, and I didn't like prime the pump for you with song lyric because this is good, but I just had a conversation about this song with a family member, and it might be a real interesting one in light of the authority conversation. Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, sure, it sounds fun. And then you sent me a song that like ripped my heart out. Which is great, Fortunately, I've learned to pick it back up.
Exactly,
and put it in,
exactly what you look for in music. Yeah. So that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, we're going to
now this to the ride.
This song is called "My Pastor." Yeah. By an artist that goes by the name of Baby Bugs. Yeah. It's not a very well-known song, nor a
Mm-hmm.
very well-known artist, but you can find it on YouTube. Song came out about 6 months ago,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and we thought it was a good follow-up
Sure.
to the authority conversation.
Yeah.
Because, well, I think.
You
I
think.
shouldn't say we.
I'm along for the ride, Michael. You're under the bus. I'm getting drugged behind it. And you're driving now.
I have like, who's driving the bus? So the reason that the reason I thought it was a good follow-up to that conversation is because this is the expression of somebody who it sounds like has been hurt by someone who took authority too far.
Yeah, and just the angst of existing in a community where they weren't welcome.
Yeah.
Is kind of how I felt, and I would just throw out there, if you're like a curious person like I am, and you start going and looking at like what's their other music like, it will be a very uncomfortable journey, and you'll be like, wow, that's weird. But this one, like most of the music that I heard from this artist was very different than this song. But there's a lot of songs about, I would say, spiritual hurt or trauma or even just a rebellion against.
Yeah.
There's a lot of angst in some of the earlier music that I saw, but this one just felt really vulnerable and kind of heartbreaking.
And I want to address that just briefly.
Sure.
That I think sometimes we tend to disregard a person's expression of their experience because it's not our experience.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, and I've been trying to recognize this in multiple facets, not just the spiritual or the church, like politically, familially, and family structures, that most people are reacting to something. They don't just come to a conclusion, or they don't just act a certain way without an impetus to do that.
Yeah.
So when we see somebody saying something that we disagree with, or acting in a way that we disagree with, or that doesn't fit our experience, we can become frustrated, discouraged, or defensive.
Yeah.
And I think it would serve us better and our communities better if we just started thinking, what are they reacting to?
Sure.
Okay, I disagree with that. It's not my experience. I feel defensive.
Yeah.
But let me stop. What is this person reacting to?
Yeah, I know. I remember, this is random, but what isn't with my brain? When we did our series on Made for Life, one of the sessions, one of the teachings in there is on listening well, learning to listen.
Yeah, listening.
Right. And so I feel like in this song, since you sent it to me, I've listened to it multiple times every day. You know, even was listening to it this morning on the way in.
Yeah, I did too.
And it's one where the initial time that I listened to it, I felt like I got glassy eyed because it's sad when you hear somebody go, my experience in and around church and with God was so isolating and negative that that I, I'm okay just to remove that from my life now.
Yep.
And the people that I looked to as spiritual leaders, they're just like me, and I don't buy what they're selling anymore.
Yeah.
And as a pastor, as a dad, as somebody that's been in and around churches for a long time, I've seen that story play out. And I've just not heard it so musically vulnerable. And so there was a lot of to hear the lyrics in and throughout this song was just very like, whoa, okay, I don't like this. And I don't like and I had to guard my, I was like I don't like churches that make people feel this way. Was a big chunk of it. But then I remember, like, I'm sure there's been people that have responded this way that I've been a pastor in their life, right? And it's not an intentional way to go about things, but I've had conversations of people that have echoed some of the lyric in this song of like, I put in the effort to study the word, but it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I've never heard God's voice, and so I just presume He's not there. And so I've had conversations with folks like this over the years.
Yeah.
Um, that to hear this song and work through the lyric a little bit and going like, okay, yeah, this is somebody's experience. And then I popped on because, I'm that curious guy. I went to the YouTube, to the video on YouTube, and I read the comments. And one of them that stuck out was, "This is why I went from being a Christian to an atheist."
Wow.
Was one of the comments that was in there. And I was like, okay, yeah. And there's not a lot of comments. I think, as you said, they're not a massively popular artist.
Yeah.
But there was like 75 comments on there, and a lot of them.
That's more than our videos.
Yeah, it's way more than ours, right? So they're bigger than we are.
Yeah.
But the dynamic for a lot of them was, I don't have your spiritual experience, but I so like resonate with this. And so there's a demographic of people that this artist is like bridging the gap into, that very much like this is their story, or it resonates with them. And I would say it resonated with me in a different way, more of just sadness. What about your experience with it? Since you found it.
Yeah, well, I was shown it. So my experience was unique in that my daughter shows me a ton of new music. Both of my kids love music. We have Spotify so that we all explore music together. It's always my son or my daughter is going to have the control of the music while we're driving somewhere. So they're always going, "Oh, I found this song. What do you think of this song? This is cool. What do you think?" I really like these guys. It's cool when they're finding like 90s stuff, and I'm like, yes, I listened to this. This is awesome. But my daughter, one of her favorite things to do is ride in the car and show me new music. And we just we'll like drive for an hour and a half and listen to 25 songs. And this was one of the songs. And she said something like, this one might be a little weird, or she had almost like a disclaimer before it. But we'd been listening to about 5 or 6 other Baby Bugs songs at that point. And she just made like some statement about, I don't know what you'll think of this one. And then we listened to it. And I think we paused it after that because I was like, I was so close to just
not being
weeping.
Able to drive.
Yeah. I was just, I was so broken up by it. And I had to like maintain composure so I could drive. And we talked about it, and we just talked briefly because she always wants to move to the next song. But we did talk a little bit about how damaging, like that's one of the saddest songs that either of us have heard, and how so much damage seems to have been done by she talks about her pastor, because it's called My Pastor, but it's really the broader, it's the pastor and it's the broader church, but the culture that was built by leadership. The leadership builds the culture. So ultimately there is a responsibility there to the leaders to develop a culture that can accept and love and cherish everybody's experience and not break them down. And so that was the first introduction to it. And I was deeply saddened by it because, like you, I've heard those stories. I've not heard it presented in such a poetic and heartbreaking way. But I've sat with coffee with people that are like, I did this. I can't, I have one friend who attended here for many years who sat down with me and said, I just can't do it anymore. It's not the Grove. It's being in church. I have there's so much pain and hurt associated with church that I just don't feel like I can attend anymore and be honest. And that's been about 3 years. It's been quite a few years, but that's probably 3 or 4 different people I've had similar conversations with varying degrees of attendance.
Sure.
So to hear this song in this way was very deeply heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because
It
it's so
exposes a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true to life.
Mm-hmm. Maybe since we've talked kind of like
Yeah.
in generalities, maybe I'll read the first verse for us,
Mm-hmm.
and then that kind of gives will give us a little bit here. But it begins, I don't think that any pastors practice what they preach because they recite the same old words 1,000 times a week. And my pastor loves to tell me that I am deeply flawed and I'll never be worthy of being loved by his God. I studied in my Bible, didn't understand a word. I thought if I made an effort, then somehow I'd be heard. God just never answered, and I'll never hear his voice. But there's so many things I'll remember, all against my choice.
Yeah.
What like stood out to you when you? I can only imagine being there with my child and going. So here's the song, Dad. I want you to hear this.
Mm-hmm.
You're also like a pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she did assure me you're one of the good ones.
Scott, on the other hand, that's good.
Yeah,
right?
she did want to let me know that this was not her experience necessarily, and she didn't feel this way. But I think for me so the first two lines, I don't think that any pastors practice what they preach because they recite the same old words 1,000 times a week. I felt like that kind of set up the rest of the song.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to me that they had this way of processing.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way to live
Mm-hmm.
that's incongruent with how my pastor's living.
Yeah.
So, and also they're talking about any pastor.
Yeah.
So they're taking their experience
Mm-hmm.
and saying, this is a broader experience than just me.
Yeah.
And so I look at those lyrics and go, oh, they're looking at the broader experience of people in churches.
Yeah.
There are pastors who are saying the same thing over and over again, and yet their lives don't reflect the truth or what they're saying,
mm-hmm.
which means they have a standard in mind
mm-hmm.
based on what they're hearing.
Yeah.
But then the pastor's not measuring it up. So, which I think is just so fascinating that they would say there is a standard.
Yeah.
You're just not hitting it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I feel like we've tried to live vulnerably or at least openly.
Yeah. Yeah.
To not come across as the expert in the room,
mm-hmm.
But as just somebody that maybe has had more opportunity to study in our timeline, like availability. But we're more like coming alongside of as guides that are recognize a deeply flawed inherency in us. But you're right. The expression of that, I felt like it was very. This was not this only happened in my my church, right? This was no. I don't think anybody's doing it.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that people that maybe have grown up in church or around church or even some outside of have an idea of what a Christian believes or should and how they should live.
Yeah.
And then to not see it
right
is really I think we maybe don't do a good job of acknowledging that we're a city on a hill that people are going, well, avoid that place.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It's not it's not the light that people look at and go, oh, wow,
There's
God's good.
there.
There's safety. Yeah, God's good.
Mm-hmm.
Let's glorify God because of what he's doing up there in that place.
Yep.
It's it's bright or it's up there, but just stay away from it. There's nothing but disappointment.
Yeah, the brightness of the city becomes a warning sign rather than an invitation.
Yeah. And that's the to sit back and just come to terms with, or at least acknowledge that in the eyes of a lot of folks, their experience is that the church is not a place of hope.
Yeah.
And the pursuit of God is empty.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you could get into some of the theological conversations in and around why that might be the case, but we've tried to not make massive like theological, like, well, this is just purely a theological position,
right? Because it's people's lived experience. So there has to be a way that theology becomes lived experience.
Sure. Yeah, and so I think it feels in some ways kind of echoes of the Old Testament prophets of people saying, well, of them saying, oh, listen, you're saying you've got all of these things, you're saying this and this and this and this, but you're not living like that. You're taking advantage of others. You're doing this, you're doing that, right? And it becomes very much a condemning, a point of condemnation. And so, I think we can look at it with a little more nuance and go, we understand that's not everybody. But it's enough that that people looking and observing the way the church has lived go, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that.
Last night we went roller skating with the youth group, and there was a young man there who I don't know if he'd ever been skating before.
He said he had.
Said he had. He's not very verbal. He's not very coordinated. And I spent at least 20 minutes of the night holding his hand, skating around, and just kind of pulling him along. And I'm not a great skater. Okay. So, but as I think back on that, I was thinking about that as you were talking, that I don't know if I've ever felt more pastoral than when I'm just holding somebody's hand, going, I don't really know how to skate either, but I can push one way or another, and I'm just pulling you. I'm helping you stay upright, man. And as we go around to turns, I'm going, you got this. You're good. You're good. Okay, we're good now. You made it.
I watched that. Because that same individual was having a hard time getting his skates on, and so I spent the first couple minutes there, like loosening up skates and putting them on and tying them, and I sat there going, like, almost crying at one point because I was sitting there and going, like, this is like. But I felt the same thing. I know he said he'd been skating. But he was just not ready for it. And so it's
not to be on his own.
And so it's interesting to hear that. Like I saw what my experience was with him in trying to help him get ready to get out there, and then I was helping another student get their skates tied up, and then by the time I got out onto the rink, I saw you with him, and I was just like. I was grateful that his experience with pastors was somebody that didn't just have him show up and then just like whatever. And I think one of the lyrics in the song that she talks about later on was, I don't think my church would have really cared if I just disappeared or if I was never there. And I think a lot of times when we find someone that may demand more of us than what we have the ability to do, it's convenient to go, well, if they aren't here, okay.
It's easier that way. And I felt like that was a picture of what pastoring should be, is just maybe pulling someone along who's just a little bit behind. Not trying to set yourself up or expecting them to do anything great or do spins or tricks by the end of the night. I'm just like, I just hope I make it without hurting him. I don't want to fall on top of him. If he falls, I'll try to hold him. I just don't want to land on top of him.
That's so funny.
I like that. But I think that goes, keep that metaphor, keep that image into the next four lines. My pastor loves to tell me that I am deeply flawed. I'll never be worthy of being loved by his God. Studying my Bible, didn't understand a word. I thought if I made an effort, somehow I'd be heard.
Mm.
So that image of holding somebody and
Yeah.
like rolling alongside of them
Yeah.
versus yelling at them from as you go by.
Yeah.
You know, get it together.
Yeah.
You got to do this better.
Left, right,
Just,
left,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. Do the just push off with your right foot. And I mean, I thought maybe I'll explain the process to him. And then
Yeah.
I was like, I think he's too scared to
Yeah.
really even listen right now.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just going to keep holding his hand until he feels comfortable enough.
Yeah.
And so this like, is it our job to tell people they're deeply flawed?
Yeah.
That's the message that this person took from church.
Yeah.
That was what their pastor was telling them.
Sure. Yeah. I think there is so much I think the weight of it all sits heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like as Christians, we do believe that there is like an inherent issue inside all of us, ourselves included as pastors, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet in the way that Christ lived and interacted, the people that I think were not everybody except for the religious, like we've got it all together. You know, he was incredibly compassionate to them. There was a humility in the way he engaged, and I feel like there was a call to a different way of living with them.
Yeah.
But there was compassion and like coming alongside of and making time for that I see in the life of Jesus in the Gospels that makes me go, something's off.
Yeah.
If the role of the spiritual leaders that we allow into our lives is purely just to talk about how bad you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially for some folks that really already know that or struggle with that or already don't feel comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
Like it just affirms I don't really matter and I don't matter to him because it's
so
weird.
flawed.
It's weird in the sense of like this last week at church, I taught on rethinking sin, and I opened with the story of my grandma Fern like dragging me off of a couch.
Yep.
And
for watching Belinda Carlisle.
And just repeatedly calling me a sinful boy. And as I thought through that story, I thought the story was funny when I first remembered it.
Yeah.
And then as I started thinking through it later in the week, I was like, that really shaped the way that I saw myself.
Yeah, it's deeply damaging when you think about it.
That, you know, okay, well, I have to be more secretive about these things. I have to, like, there's a limit to what my grandma loves about me.
Yeah.
There's all of these other things that go into, like, how do I even see sin, and how do I approach it, and what are the limits of someone's love for me, and the way that was reinforced through church and Bible college and some of those other experiences in life, it was to then sit down and read these lyrics. It's like, it's so much of how we engage as the body of Christ with other people, because again, she doesn't just stay there with the pastor. She's like I was always the rebellious teen. I was the one that she said, I think she says,
as that.
Yeah, I was seen as that.
Yeah.
She said I was like desperately lonely and I just wanted to be seen. And nobody really was interested in what my experience was, so I just stopped talking.
Yep.
And so much of I just kept thinking of people.
Yeah.
Like throughout this song, I was like, wait, okay, that I couldn't not think of faces and individual stories and go, is that why they're quiet?
Yeah. They're not Well, I thought of the reactive thing, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're reacting to something,
Mm-hmm.
so that
Yeah.
shut them down because
Yeah.
they're reacting.
Yeah.
Um, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
Because I really like verse 2.
Mm.
But I want to look at another aspect of verse 1 here, where they talk about studied in my Bible, didn't understand a word.
Mm-hmm.
I thought if I made an effort, somehow I'd be heard. That thinking that your effort
Mm-hmm.
would somehow unlock something.
Yeah.
That
Sure.
like that's a cultural
Yeah.
that's a cultural thing.
That's a cultural, Christian cultural thing
Yeah,
too.
yeah. And so if your efforts, if you're not connecting with God,
Yeah.
if you're not hearing anything, if you're not having the experience that somebody else is having,
Mm-hmm.
then the problem is you.
Yeah. Especially if you've got somebody at the front telling you how
How
much of a
deeply
screw
flawed
up.
you
Yeah.
all. Yeah, yeah.
You're a screw up,
Yep.
and you got to get right,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you got to be, and then, eh, and whether they were saying that or not, that's how it was received,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That they were the problem,
Right. Right.
and so then therefore, like, okay, well, I want to get right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be the problem, so I'll study the word
Yeah,
more.
just keep working harder.
I'll keep working to understand the Bible better,
Yep.
and I don't understand any of it. And not only that, I just don't even hear God.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
So it's just reinforcing how
Mhm.
deeply flawed
Yeah.
you are
yeah,
because you're not hearing God,
Mhm.
and it's because I'm flawed and I keep trying harder and I'm
Yeah.
still not hearing God. So that means I'm still deeply flawed. And
yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
As you're talking about that, it's like I think the reality is that everyone has expectations
Mm.
about what faith or spirituality should look like.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so to come into it, like whether somebody would be a Christian or not, we are spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so we come to these things with a set of expectations of, like, if I do this, then this will be the result.
Mm-hmm.
And so within Christianity, often what my experience was when I struggled with sin, I needed to read the Bible more and pray more,
Yeah.
so that it would, like, put more information into my head so I would understand it, right? And there's this weird thing where I was kind of like, oh, that was just me. It's not, though.
Yeah.
It is a sense of, here's one person whose story was, I understood. I was told I was a screw up. I was
Yeah.
a failure. I was flawed.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to do what I thought I should,
Yeah.
and I read the Bible more, and I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And in conversations with people of, like, what does it mean to hear the voice of God?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if that person was told, well, you hear the voice of God through the Bible, well, I
Mhm.
don't understand it.
Yeah.
How can I understand God if I don't understand the Bible?
Right. Right.
Or, and again, I don't know their traditional background or anything, but some folks feel like, well, should I hear an audible voice of God?
Mhm.
Should I have that? Like, people come to their faith with an expectation,
Yeah.
and sometimes those expectations are okay,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, well, God doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah.
So, but if you have the expectation He does, it
Mhm.
just reinforces those lies that
Yeah.
we're told by the enemy of our soul.
And if the pastor,
Yeah.
if the leader
Yeah.
has these expectations,
Yeah.
and is saying, here is what it looks like to be a good Christian.
Yeah.
Here's what it looks like to follow Jesus, or whatever. Like, we are just
Mm.
inundated with those messages.
Yeah.
That whether it's a political stance, this
Mhm.
I've seen billboards now
Yeah.
that if you're a Christian, this is how you vote.
Mhm.
I've heard so many people say that.
Yeah.
Like, there are just a myriad of expectations that get hung on your faith,
Yep.
your
Yeah.
spiritual life.
Yeah.
So and it's so manipulative because that's a deep part of who we are.
Yeah.
Is our spirituality, and the manipulation comes in. Well, if you're this way,
Mhm.
then you do this.
Yeah.
If you're a good Christian, then you do this.
Yeah.
That's, to me, it's more than just manipulation. That's spiritually abusive
Mhm.
to attach the way you have to think the way I do
Yeah.
in order to be considered a good Christian.
Yeah.
That's so deeply damaging, because then you can't think any other way. And if you don't,
Yeah.
and that goes kind of into the chorus a little bit
Yeah.
too. where they say, "Oh, why must I wear God's disguise? One day I'll learn who I really am."
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how the chorus starts.
Yeah.
And to think that that's the view. Like I have to put this mask on,
Yeah.
and now
In order to fit
in
in,
order to fit
I
in,
have to lie about who I am.
yeah, yeah, and that's God's disguise now. It's not just
Yeah.
the pastors, because the culture, the leadership,
Yeah.
and then the culture of the church has spoken for God
Mm-hmm.
in this way. They have represented God this way.
Yeah.
So I have to wear this mask
Mm-hmm.
in order to be seen as not flawed, in order to be seen as acceptable.
Or just acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just to be seen.
It's conditional. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
But that second line of "one day I'll learn who I really am" is this, okay, I've got to get away from this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not where I can find
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah.
This is not where I'm seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not where I'm heard.
Yeah.
I have to move away from this space
Yeah.
in order to actually
Yeah.
find out who I am.
Yeah. And it's interesting that this artist's story is like one, but it doesn't matter whether it was like I've seen it in so many different paths out of the church, that maybe it's like the person that works with their hands that goes like,
Yeah.
like, you know what, I just don't fit in there
Yeah.
because it's all like it's soft and flowery or whatever, and they're
Mhm.
like, that's just not me, and so I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah.
go find a place that I resonate, you know.
Mhm.
And like the guys that resonate in the woods. I've
Yeah.
had conversations with dudes that are just like, man, you know where I feel most connected to God is
Yeah.
when I'm out in my hunting stand.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay,
All right.
you know.
Yeah.
But if they feel like I've got to be somebody different,
Yeah. Yeah.
then like, why am I going to go to church?
Yeah.
Like I've seen that in like the men's group that we have right now. There's because it's such a diverse group of guys.
Mhm.
You know, and so what does it look like? What is the expectation for them to feel like they fit into a spiritual community?
Yeah.
Right. And every one of them has a little bit of a different dynamic there. But then what about somebody else? Like the more that I thought about her lyrics, the more I was like, they really just put a story to something
Yeah.
that I think is bigger than just their own. And I think that's why so many people in the comments seem to have resonated with it. Even if it wasn't their experience, they can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. They've felt it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when we talk about people flourishing, like we tend to talk about that quite a bit here, that our goal is to help people flourish. And part of that is learning who they are, who they were meant to be, like growing and maturing. But that's not always like, that's not their experience. And that wasn't my experience in a lot of churches. My experience was closer to, you remember the Steve Taylor song, early 80s? I Want to Be a Clone. Yeah. Yeah. It's all about it. One of the lyrics in the chorus for that is cloneliness is next to godliness.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's this idea, I mean, it goes along with that, wearing God's disguise. Like, you can be whoever you want outside of the church, but as soon as you walk in the building, you have to, like, you become a clone of everybody else.
Which adds to the lines that come right after that of like, why must I go along with your lies and walk blindly, not guided by your hand? Because my pastor's only a man. And then and God, and so it goes from the people to here's the spiritual reality that's come out of my experience.
Yeah.
And God doesn't really have a plan.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, so if I have seen someone that I don't buy into what they're teaching, because they're not living it.
Yep.
And this has been my experience.
Which makes it a lie. Like, that's how I interpreted that. They're saying all these words, but they're not living it, which makes it a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And so therefore, like, I will take that and apply it to even God.
Yeah.
Like, I did the shtick. I did the things that I thought were supposed to help. They didn't.
Yeah.
So I don't buy it anymore. Why do I have to live a false lie?
Yeah.
About like I like all of a sudden I've just got to put on this disguise, and one day I won't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And kind of the feeling is that almost like now they're at that part where they don't have to put the disguise on anymore.
Right. Because
And so,
they've left.
Yeah, they've left.
It's
And God doesn't have a plan, and I'm okay with that.
And how sad, like, there's a lot of heartbreaking moments in this song. But I thought of how sad is it that you had to leave a spiritual community to feel free and to find your identity. That's the opposite of what it should look like, because the rest of the world tries to shove you into a cookie cutter of some sort. And take away freedom. That we talk about how Paul talks so much in Romans about the bondage of sin and how there's freedom in Christ. But it's been flipped. Like if the rest of the world looks more free than church, then something's wrong. If you feel like you have to leave the spiritual community in order to find an identity, then the focus of that community is not helping.
Sure. I think the one thing that I also like in thinking through this is how should we then as churches respond? Because there are certain things that we would look at and say, okay, this is what God calls us to, right? And so how can we be accepting even if we don't agree with it? Right? There's got to be at least, like, because like if you're not clear, or if you're not, like, if you're kind of like hedging your bets with what you say, then chances are you're going to cut somebody deeply if you're not clear, if you're not speaking truth, right? And so it raises that thought in my head of, there is a difference between accepting someone and agreeing with them in their perspective. And so, but again, I think a lot of that comes down to, do we actually live what we say we believe? You know, do we actually, like, it's one thing to say, well, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And meanwhile, we've got a long litany of things where we're just like, we just conveniently look over that part of Jesus's teachings.
Which is, I was going to say, that's why the Sermon on the Mount, like, included in that is that don't judge your brother who has a speck in his eye until you deal with the log in your own eye. Like, it'll take me a lifetime to deal with the log in my eye. So I'm the log. I'm just trying to get, if I'm just focusing on, let me deal with the issues that I have in a way that perhaps might help you deal with the issues that you have. I'm not here to tell you the issues that you have. I'm not here to tell you how flawed you are. I'm here to recognize how flawed I am. And then tell you, here's how I'm working on myself. Here's how God is working with me in this.
It's a strange dynamic to think through, like, even as I think through how I teach. There early on, it was always like, in my head, it was like, you need to do this, right? Not I would usually do we, but I always, like, it was a real intentional decision to say we, and
we need to do this
I struggle, like, this is a challenge for me, like, to actually, like, present it as, listen, this is what we are called to. This is what you're called to. Because the preaching that I grew up hearing was often very just you, right? Which it would be very easy to catch on to that. If you are in a church where what you are taught is about what you have to do, that it affects the way that I think through things. Or I guess it reinforces the sense that says, when I teach, I've had enough conversations with people that they will say, I understand you don't preach at us, you preach with us. You teach what God is doing in your life. And there's a difference in that compared to, like, just telling me what I'm supposed to do.
The sermons that I get most excited to speak are the ones where I learn something new myself.
We're going to do one on beard care soon, right?
Oh, I did that one. It's that passage where Jesus says, when you're fasting, don't look miserable, but put oil on your hair and your beard. I'm like, Jesus gave beard care
Yeah,
options.
yeah. I will again. I will feel like a failure because I can't grow a beard.
That's a very niche
It's a
sermon.
very yeah.
All right, so let's keep going here. There's just a
Sure.
couple of lines in verse 2 that I
Sure.
think are important.
Yeah.
I'll read down through that, and then
Mhm.
we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Verse 2, I don't think that any church would ever welcome me. The kids all ignored what I said, so I just didn't speak.
Mhm.
And I was always known as the awkward rebel teen. I was desperate and lonely, so I begged to be seen.
Yeah.
That's the first half of verse 2. And I thought
Yeah.
those were heartbreaking. Those
Yeah.
were other moments where I was
Yeah.
like, oh, so
well, and
choked up.
I think what was heartbreaking in it, is that they still feel like no church would accept me.
Right.
Right. And it's not just their church, it was any church.
Mhm.
I don't think that any church would ever welcome me.
Yeah.
Right. That's a I know who I am now.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't be
and
welcome
I'm
there.
not welcome in the church.
Yeah.
And when I was there, everybody ignored what I said anyway.
Yeah.
And they just labeled me as the rebellious teenager.
Yeah, I thought this was so insightful.
Mm-hmm.
To say they ignored me, so I just didn't speak. And you already talked a little bit about that, but that was the response to being ignored.
Yeah.
And then when they didn't speak, they made up a story about her.
Yeah.
Like the awkward rebel teen wasn't who they were.
Mm-hmm.
That was who they became because of their response to no one's listening.
It was the identity that was put on them.
Yeah. And I thought of how often we do that with people. Whether it's in the church or outside of the church.
Yeah.
You see a person, you don't know them, but you create a story really quickly. A one-sentence story.
Yeah.
Here's who they are. And then you treat them that way. Like you engage with them.
The identity you give someone is the expectation you have for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I have a really, a good friend that her experience growing up in church, she always had questions, always had opinions about things. And she just was like, and the amount of times that she talks about her church experience being told, just be quiet.
Yeah.
Like you're you're the wrong gender, and 2, you're too young to have these opinions.
Yeah.
And that person was very like, I don't buy that, and it's one of the things that I appreciate about that friendship. But you don't have to be the awkward, rebellious team to be seen as rebellious.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because for her, she played by all the other rules. She just was very vocal about not understanding why things were done certain ways.
Yep.
And if she saw something that didn't look right, she called it out, even as a young person. And so it's it affected the way that they saw the church too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you don't have to be the awkward, rebellious team to be seen as or to be labeled. I'll say that. You don't.
Yeah. Well, that's not who they are. It's who they're labeled as and treated as such.
Yeah. It's attributing motivation to action.
Yep.
And I try very hard to not to make to say this is your motivation for why you're doing this, unless somebody tells me why they're doing the things that they do. I try to give the benefit of the doubt and try to separate motivation from actions.
Yep.
Because I think it matters, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I think this one again speaks to the broader culture of the church, because the students that were around, like this person, just like they stopped talking. Like they nope.
Yep.
And then the group as a whole put a label on them.
Yeah. So they didn't speak, and I love those 2 lines. It's so insightful to say, I was always known as the awkward rebel teen. But what was the reality?
Yeah. I was desperate and lonely, and I wanted to be seen.
Yeah. See, the story was awkward and rebellious, the reality was I needed something.
I needed,
I
yeah,
needed to be seen.
yeah. I
I
needed to be
had,
loved and
yeah,
cared for
yeah, yeah.
for who I was. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I thought through that, through the people that have walked through the doors at the Grove over the years,
Mm.
and you know, have maybe been not the most social butterfly,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
who desperately want to be connected to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people don't know how to express that,
Yeah.
and sometimes they do express it, but they want it so badly it ends up making other people feel weird.
Yeah.
And then they still are isolated.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does matter that we don't just, like, we're not just friendly on the surface,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that we see people
Mm-hmm.
and that we hear people,
Yeah.
and give them the opportunity to be known, right?
I think just to affirm that, like, the ability to see people
Mm-hmm.
is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think it's why we have to slow down.
yeah, yeah. To see them, to hear them, means that we don't create that story
Mm-hmm.
about them. We
Yeah.
actually see who they are.
Yeah.
That's really, really hard.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
And it takes time to
And
get out of our
patience.
own story.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if our own story demands it, well, you know what? I don't have time for this person. I've
Mhm.
got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've got to get this done. I've got to do that. Then we don't have the opportunity to, like, actually be present.
And I think that, to me, I think Jesus saw people like
Mhm.
that was one of the things that he brought to them,
Mm-hmm.
was the ability to see them. And there's so many
Yeah.
times where we hear in scripture he knew
Yeah.
their minds or something like that.
Yeah.
That was like usually negative. He knew what they were getting
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
But when he interacted with people, like Jasmine, my wife, just did the study in the women's group
Mm-hmm.
about the woman who had the issue of blood for
Mhm.
12 years, and
Yeah.
she was healed by Jesus just by touching
Yeah.
his garment, and he chose to see her. Like,
Mhm.
he saw who she was, and all of this was a part of a bigger study. Like, all these women in the Bible, the Samaritan woman,
Yeah.
he saw who she was. He saw her.
Yeah.
He didn't see the story about her, even though he knew the story about
Yeah.
her. He saw who she was. He saw this woman that touched the hem of his garment and called her daughter.
Yeah.
He saw Zacchaeus. I was trying
Yeah.
to remember his name. Is that the one?
The wee little man
Yeah,
in
the
the
wee
tree.
little
What was
man.
his
Yeah.
name?
Anyone he engaged with,
Yeah.
he saw who they were,
Yeah.
not just the story about them.
Yeah.
And I think that, as not just as pastors, but as followers of Christ, to do what Jesus did is to see people,
Mm-hmm.
who they are and what their needs are.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
I think I mean, if you had other things in that section that you wanted to hit, that's fine. I think the outro is probably worth just, just having a quick thing on.
Yeah, let's I know, we are getting a little long.
Yeah,
we won't go through all of them. Let's go to the outro. You want to read it?
Yeah, it says, built my house up upon the sand. Nothing matters. It's all out of my hands, and no one really understands that my pastor is only a man. I don't know if the lyric of "Built my house upon the sand" is an acknowledgement of, like, I understand I've unmoored myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a pretty easy allusion to what Jesus said.
Yeah. And nothing really matters. It's all out of my hands. Like it's almost like I've made peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're gonna say that I've left my foundation for life.
I see it almost as sarcastic.
Yeah.
Like, oh well, I've done this. Yeah, I've been told not to. I did it. And it's out of my hands.
Yeah.
So,
and then it's I don't want to say it's the accusatory, but they don't understand that my pastor's human.
Yeah.
It's like I've done this, like, kind of that sarcastic or, tongue in cheek.
Yep.
But they're still looking at him as something more than what he is.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Yeah.
And I think it just kind of brought back home the reality that people will make decisions about what they believe, what they don't believe, what spiritual realities and truth claims they'll hold to. and as I look at it, this artist has a truth claim now.
Yeah.
It is opposite of what they were taught
yeah.
in church growing up. It is like they are their truth claim. And and there's a sense where some folks would be like, look, they're just saying that they're the one that's into
and
it would become like
it almost confirms what they already thought.
Yeah.
If they were the awkward, rebellious teen, well, look at where they ended up.
Yeah.
We always knew it would end up this way.
Exactly. And I think the word of caution I would have there is that people don't tend to arrive at places without reasons.
Yes. It's that reaction thing.
People don't come to conclusions like in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so if the way we engage with people that disagree with us as Christians is more condemnation, how will they see the hope that we have? How will they see a way of life that looks like Jesus? How will they see, right?
That's just confirming the story they have about us then.
Yeah.
Because if that is, if their experience in church was condemnation, I'm so flawed, I'm not listened to, I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I don't matter unless I wear this mask. And they leave and everybody goes, well, yeah, we always saw that coming. You know, they were awkward and rebellious anyway. And they treat them this way. Well, then that confirms their story about them. Which maybe is true. Like maybe there is a confirmation, but then to ascribe that story to all church, to all spirituality, to all faiths and all pastors. It's we are to be people that break that story. That's I guess that would be the goal that I think of.
And I mean, you know, in many ways things rise and fall with the culture of leadership in a church. And so in many ways, like, for us in particular, I heard this song and I was just like, it really matters how I live. And then the secondary thought was, it really matters how we as a church live. You know, that how is it that we provide voice and awareness for people in the church that may feel like they have to put on a mask just to be there. I appreciated you bringing this one up. It was uncomfortable. I'll probably still listen to the song because it just, I think it, I don't want to say it humbles me, but it reminds me what's at stake.
Yeah, I think that it does. It's that, to me, I listened to it and thought, I don't want to have I don't want to have this much power over people, that it will shape how they view God. And yet, to be in a position of leadership, you're ascribed some form of authority. Whether you want it or not. And so it's even more critical that people in leadership have a view of authority and power that is not coercive, not manipulative, but to use that authority to raise others up rather than keep them all in line.
And that our lives are consistent with our teaching. That's it.
And we consistently teach that we're flawed. So our lives are consistent with that.
I'm going to get that as a face tattoo. Flawed.
Your face already says that.
I know. It's fine.
That's why I have a beard. It doesn't look as flawed. Oh, I think that's enough for today. I got Scott to leave. That was enough for today. Well, thanks for sticking with us. If you stuck with us all the way to the end, that was kind of a deep dive into some pretty heavy and disconcerting lyrics. But I think it's good for us to engage with things like this.
If you hear voices that are around us, it helps you not be in a bubble.
Yeah, that's the problem is if you just immediately dismiss things you disagree with, then you don't actually start to explore the why. And perhaps you may have to be humble enough to accept that that changes need to be made in your own life before you start judging somebody else's experience.
Yeah, that's good.
If you are nearby and you want to check the church out, you're always welcome to do that.
Absolutely.
If you want to communicate with us, ask questions, give comments,
provide
suggestions for topics, you can go to discoverthegrove.com and fill out a communication form there, a contact form there, or you can go and leave a comment in the YouTube channel. I see you laughing in the screen, and I'm like, wait, what is he laughing at?
I was just thinking of other songs that may be suggested.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I was like, that'd be a hard pass.
That'll be interesting. That could get very interesting.
That's why I was laughing. I was trying not to draw attention to it.
You can suggest topics, not other songs. Thanks so much for joining us and sticking with us. Hope you have a great week.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.